It was Christmas Eve in Cleveland, and the cold had settled deep into the bones of the city. Mabel Turner had nothing, not the kind of nothing people say when they are short on cash, but true and total nothing. No home, no coat, only a torn blanket that had stopped keeping anyone warm 2 winters ago. She sat behind the loading dock of a Walgreens on Lexington Avenue, the concrete beneath her so bitterly cold it burned straight through her jeans. She pulled the blanket tighter, though she already knew it would not help. It had not helped in a long time. Then she heard it, faint, coming from the green dumpster 8 feet to her left. A sound, weak, almost nothing, but not quite nothing, a cry. She stood and walked to the dumpster, pushing open the heavy, rusted lid with both hands. Inside lay a plastic grocery bag, tied loosely at the top. The cry came from within. Her hands shook as she reached in, not from fear, but from the cold that had long since robbed her fingers of feeling. She untied the bag. Inside was a newborn baby, only hours old. The umbilical cord was still attached, cut rough and tied with what looked like a shoelace. The skin had gone purple in places. The lips were blue. The cry had faded to the small, desperate sound a body makes when it is trying to stay alive and running out of reasons. The baby was wrapped in nothing more than a Walmart bag and a thin hand towel. That was everything. Someone had decided this child was worth. Mabel stood in the parking lot holding a dying baby on Christmas Eve. She had no phone, no money, no way to call anyone. Ray sat 20 feet away against the wall. He had been there all night. He saw everything. Don't, he said. You call 911. You hand it over. You walk away. That's not your problem, Mabel. She did not answer. She looked at the baby, then at the torn blanket on the ground, the only thing she still owned that counted as something. She picked it up and wrapped the child in it carefully, the way you wrap something when you know the wrapping is all you have. She tucked the edges close and pulled the baby against her chest. Now she had nothing. Not the almost nothing she had carried 5 minutes earlier. Actual nothing. No blanket. No barrier between her body and the brutal cold. She had perhaps 2 hours before hypothermia would become real. She knew this. She was not new to cold. He was smaller than she was. He would freeze first. So she gave him what she had. She stood. The cold struck her at once, full and merciless. She held the baby close and began walking toward the streetlight at the end of the block. 3 blocks to St. Augustine's. The church would be open. Churches stay open on Christmas Eve. Ray watched her go. She did not look back. The wind came off the street with weight. Her arms shook. The baby had stopped crying, not because he was better, but because he was too cold to cry. She walked faster. When she reached the church, yellow light glowed through the stained glass. She climbed the steps, pulled the door open with one hand, and stepped inside with the baby pressed to her chest. Inside, it was warm. Not the warmth of a home, but the warmth of a building that still had heat and walls and a ceiling. Warm enough. Father Dominic stood near the altar, rolling up a tablecloth from the midnight service. He looked up and saw a woman in the doorway with no coat, shaking, holding something wrapped in a torn blanket. He did not ask what had happened. He walked to her, saw the baby's face, and said, "Sit down." She sat. He returned with a donated coat and placed it around her shoulders. Then he picked up the phone near the vestry and called 911. This was not a chose. It was procedure. An abandoned newborn found in a dumpster. You call. That is what you do. Mabel knew this too. She did not argue. She sat in the pew, holding the baby, and waited. The ambulance arrived quickly. 2 paramedics took the baby gently, checked his vitals, checked his temperature. One said mild hypothermia. He needed 48 hours at the hospital. He was going to be all right. Mabel looked at the paramedic and asked if she could come. He asked if she was the mother. She said no, she had found him. He paused, then told her she could ride along. She sat in the back beside the stretcher and watched them hook up a warming blanket around the baby. The siren stayed off. They drove through Cleveland on Christmas Eve in the quiet. The streets empty. House lights passing like scenes from someone else's life. At the hospital they took the baby inside. Mabel followed. At the desk a nurse asked her name. "Mabel Turner," she said. The nurse asked her relationship to the child. Mabel looked through the glass at the baby under the heat lamp and answered, "I'm the one who was there." The nurse typed something. Mabel sat down. She sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights for hours. No one brought her coffee. No one checked on her. No one told her she could go home, because no one knew she had none. Hours later, the baby was stable. A doctor came out and told her he was normal weight, no frostbite. The warming protocol had worked. He was going to be fine. Mabel nodded and said thank you. Then CPS arrived to people with clipboards and questions and forms. They spoke with her for 20 minutes. She told them everything. The dumpster, the bag, the cold, the blanket. They wrote it down. One said the baby would be placed in temporary foster care. They would take it from here. Mabel looked at her and asked if she could hold him one more time before they took him. They looked at each other. 5 minutes, they said. They brought the baby to her. She sat in the plastic chair in the hospital hallway and held him. He was warm now, clean, wrapped in a hospital blanket that was white and whole and did what a blanket was meant to do. She held him close and said it very quietly, not to anyone, not even really to him, because he was only hours old and could not understand. She said it to the space between them, the way you say things that need saying even when no one is ready to hear them. You'll be okay. She handed him back. She watched them carry him down the hall. The door closed. She sat in the chair another 10 minutes. Then she stood and walked out of the hospital into Christmas morning. Still no coat. The donated one was on the pew at St. Augustine's, where she had left it. She had no idea she had just spoken 3 words Bo would carry for the next 20 years. She did not know his name yet. Nobody did. He was a case number in a system that processed cases, not people. But Mabel Turner was not a case. She was a person, and she had been there. That was all she had. For now, it was enough. Father Dominic made one phone call, not to CPS, not to the city, but to Linda Chen at the legal aid clinic. Linda took cases no one else wanted because no one else wanted them. That was her whole business. She met Mabel in a windowless room with a wobbly table. She had the file open before Mabel sat down. She looked at it, then at Mabel, and said she would be honest. No fixed address 6 months earlier. No income. No history of child care. No spouse. No family support. The odds were not close. Mabel did not flinch. She asked what she needed. Linda listed it. Stable housing, steady income, 24 hours of foster parent training, background check, home inspection by a licensed social worker. All of it documented. All of it before the hearing. Mabel asked how long she had. The court date was several weeks away. Mabel nodded, stood, and said, "Then I'd better start." She named the baby Elijah. Not after anyone. She simply liked the name. She said it once out loud in the hospital hallway the morning CPS took him. And it sounded right. She held on to it the way you hold something when it is the only part of the situation you get to choose. In the weeks that followed, she applied for jobs. 4 places said no. The gaps in her work history and the years with no address spoke louder than she did. She kept going. The 5th place was St. Vincent Hospital, night shift housekeeping, 11 at night to 7 in the morning. The supervisor asked if she could start Monday. She said she could start that night. She found a small studio on Euclid Avenue. 1 room, a kitchen that was part of the room, a bathroom with a door that closed. The heat worked. The hot water worked. She stood in the middle of it on the first day and looked at the clean white walls. Then she started cleaning. She completed the foster parent training every Saturday for 6 weeks, for hours each time, in the basement of a community center. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, a whiteboard that still said "Welcome new foster families" in blue marker from weeks before. She was the only one who came alone. She took notes because she wanted to remember everything. She filled 2 notebooks. She did not miss a single session, not when she felt sick, not when her shift ran late, and she had almost no sleep. She showed up. She sat in the folding chair. She took notes. The social worker who came for the home inspection walked through the tiny studio in for minutes. She looked at the crib borrowed from St. Augustine's, the new sheets from the dollar store, the formula and diapers on the counter, the milk and bread and eggs in the refrigerator. She wrote her report in the car. 1 line stayed with Mabel when she read it later. Minimal, but adequate. Mabel read it twice. She chose silence. Silence had gotten her this far. The background check cleared. No criminal record. No history of violence. no substance abuse. The system had searched for a reason to say no and had found only poverty. Poverty is not a disqualification, but it is not nothing neither. It sits in the room during every hearing. It sits in the file. Everyone can see it. At the hearing, the Foster family brought Elijah in. He was several months old. Mabel had not held him since the hospital. She looked at him from across the room. He was bigger. His cheeks were fuller. He wore a blue onesie she had never seen. Someone else had been buying his clothes. Someone else had been feeding him. Someone else had been there at 2 in the morning when he cried. She sat still. She kept her hands on her knees. Her lawyer presented the facts. Stable employment for months. Stable housing. Training completed. Background clear. Home inspection passed. All requirements met. The judge looked at Mabel and asked why the court should grant custody to a woman who had no fixed address so recently. Mabel stowed. She did not look at her notes. She looked at the judge and said, "Because I showed up. Every hearing. Every class. Every time someone told me I couldn't." She paused. "I showed up." The room was quiet. The judge looked at her, then at the file, then at her again, the way you look at something when you are deciding whether the surface matches what lies beneath. Temporary custody was granted. Review in 6 months. It was not a victory. It was a reprieve. She treated it as both. They brought Elijah to her in the hallway. A woman from the Foster family said he liked to be held on the left side, that he slept better that way. Mabel took him and held him on the left side. She did not cry. She simply held him a little tighter than usual, the way you hold something when you have spent months earning the right to hold it at all. She took the bus home with him on her lap. He fell asleep before they crossed East 55th. She looked at him and thought about the dumpster, the blanket, the social workers, 2 words that had almost become the title of her life. Then she looked out the window. Cleveland moved past. She was his mother now. Not because the court said so. Because she had shown up. She worked 2 shifts after that, the day shift at a laundromat that paid cash, the night shift at the hospital. She slept in the narrow space between them. She dropped Elijah at the community daycare 6 days a week. Every morning, she set him down. Every morning he cried. Every morning, she walked out the door without looking back, not because she did not want to, but because if she turned around, she would not make it out. She knew this about herself. She planned around it. On his first day of school, she called in sick for the morning shift and walked him the 11 blocks to the elementary school. She stood outside the gate and watched the teacher take his hand. She watched them walk inside. The door closed. She stood there for more minutes for no reason at all. Then she turned and walked to work. When he was older, he came home from school one day and asked why they did not have a car. She was folding laundry on the bed. She told him they had legs and they worked fine. He said his friend Billy's mother had a car. She said Billy's mother did not have him. He looked at her and did not ask again. Even then he understood that sometimes the best answer and the true answer are the same thing. And that is enough. At a parent-teacher conference, the teacher smiled and said he was doing well, reading above grade level, quiet but engaged. Then she asked if there was anything about his background they should know. Mabel looked at her and said, "He was a good kid who did his homework." That was all she said. She never mentioned the dumpster or the blanket or the hospital or the months of folding chairs and background checks. He brought home a certificate for most improved reader. Gold border. His name printed in the center in a font trying to look official. He handed it to her like something he was not sure about. She looked at it and taped it to the kitchen wall. It fell the next week. She taped it again. It fell in March. She taped it again. The 3rd time she used 2 layers of tape. It stayed. It was still there years later. Edges curling. Tape yellowed. Gold border faded. She never took it down. She never replaced it with anything else. The blanket remained in the box under the bed, folded inside a cardboard box that had once held canned goats. She never moved it. Never washed it. Never explained it. He found it once while looking for a shoe that had rolled under the bed. He pulled the box out, opened it, looked inside, and asked what it was. She was in the kitchen. She said it was just an old blanket. He looked at the torn, thin thing, the kind of thing you would throw away without thinking, and put it back in the box. He pushed the box under the bed. He did not ask again. That was the agreement between them, unspoken and unwritten. The things in the box under the bed did not need explaining. They were there because they were there. That was enough. He knew she was not his biological mother. He had known for as long as he could remember. She had never hidden it. She had told him the way she told him, everything straight, simple, without decoration. She said she had chosen him. When he asked what that meant, she said it meant she did not have to, and she did. He thought about that for a long time, not that day, but over years. It came back to him at odd moments, in class, on the bus, at night before sleep. The idea that someone had looked at the situation, looked at the odds, looked at what it would cost, and chosen to stay anyway, not because they were obligated, but because they decided. As a teenager, he began going to the public library after school, not for homework but for the law section, in the back corner on the third floor. A row of books no one checked out, Stein still stiff. He read about custody law, foster care statutes, tenant rights, eviction procedures, not because anyone told him to, but because he had watched his mother navigate those systems since he was old enough to sit in a waiting room. CPS visits, court hearings, landlord disputes, social workers with clipboards and questions that always felt like tests. He sat at the library table with a legal dictionary open beside him, looking up words he did not know and writing them in a notebook he kept in his backpack. He did not tell her about the notebook. She found it once on the kitchen table, opened it, saw the words, closed it, and put it back where she found it. She said nothing. One evening he sat at the table while she made rice on the stove. He said the system was not broken. It worked exactly the way it was built to work. That was the problem. She looked at him for a long moment and asked when he had gotten so smart. He said he had watched her. She turned back to the rice and stood a little straighter at the stove, the way you stand when someone has seen something in you that you were not sure was visible. On another night, homework done, dishes in the sink, she was washing them with the water running. The kitchen was small enough that silence was never truly silent. He sat at the table looking at her and asked why she had kept him. Her hand stopped moving. The water kept running. She said because someone had to. He said that was not an answer. She said it was the only one she had. He looked at her. She turned back to the sink. The water ran. The plates clinked. Neither of them said anything else. The conversation ended the way most important conversations do, not with a conclusion, but with a pause neither person knows how to fill. He would ask again years later in a courtroom, and she would give a different answer. But that night, with the water running, the answer she gave was the one she had. And he accepted it the way you accept something you know is incomplete, but also true. On graduation day she sat in the last row of the small gym. That was where she always sat, the back, the edge, the place where you can see everything and nobody notices you. She had learned that position long ago and had never unlearned it. They called his name. He stood, walked to the front, shook the principal's hand, took his diploma, and looked out at the bleachers. He could not see her. The back row was too far and the lights were in his eyes. But she could see him. She could see his hands, the same hands she had held in a hospital hallway 20 years earlier. The same hands that had been purple from the cold and barely moving and wrapped in a torn blanket that did not keep anything warm anymore. Those hands were holding a diploma now. She did not clap loudly. She did not stand. She sat in the last row and watched, thinking of the dumpster behind the Walgreens, the 14-degree cold, the grocery bag with a baby inside. She had no way of knowing that in 2 years she would stand before him again, not in a graduation hall, but in a courtroom. And he would not recognize her. 2 years later, he was in his second year of law school in Columbus. He had transferred after a professor saw something in a paper he wrote about tenant rights. He worked part-time at a legal aid office. He was good at it. He was busy. He called her every 2 weeks, then every 3, then once a month, not because he did not care, but because 20-year-olds in law school are building something, and the building takes everything. The people who raised you become the people you call when you remember to call. She understood. She had raised him to leave. That was the whole point. You do not raise someone to stay in the same small room forever. You raise them to go, and then they go, and then the room is quiet. She said the same thing every time he called. I'm fine. 2 words. He believed her because he needed to. The alternative was to worrying, and worrying would not change anything. She was fine until she was not. The hospital called her into HR after 15 years on the night shift in housekeeping, Her position had been eliminated in a restructuring. She received 2 weeks of severance and information about unemployment benefits. She walked to her locker, packed a chipped coffee mug, a photograph of him on his first day of school, and a spare jacket, and walked out for the last time. She started looking for work the next week. 58 years old. No degree. No certifications. Her entire resume was one line. Hospital housekeeping for 15 years. She applied to 7 places. To call her back for interviews. Neither led to an offer. December passed, January, February. The rent was the same as it had always been. She had never been late. Not once in 19 years. She was late in December, the first time. She paid half and said she would catch up in January. She did not. January came and went. February, March, for months behind. Late fees piled on top of rent she could not pay in the first place. The math of being poor is that falling behind always costs more than keeping up ever did. The eviction notice came on a Thursday morning. A man she had never seen handed her an envelope. She said thank you. He looked at her as if no one had ever thanked him for delivering an eviction notice before. She closed the door, read the notice, folded it, and set it on the kitchen table beside the most improved reader certificate still taped to the wall with 2 layers of tape. She did not call her son. He was 300 miles away, in his 2nd year of law school, building something. She had spent 20 years making sure he could build something. She was not going to become the thing that pulled it down. This was how she loved, not by asking, not by telling, but by keeping quiet, by saying she was fine and meaning she would handle it herself, because that was what she had always done, and she was not going to stop now just because now was harder than before. She sat at the kitchen table, the eviction notice on one side, the certificate on the wall above, the blanket in the box under the bed. She did not look at any of them for very long. She simply sat in the quiet of the apartment she had lived in for 19 years, the apartment where he had taken his first steps, where she had taped a certificate to the wall 3 times, where she had said, "I choose you," and meant it so completely that the words had rearranged everything that came after. Several weeks stood between her and the hearing. She washed her coffee mug, set it on the counter, and went to bed. Tomorrow she would look for work again. Tomorrow she would try the nursing home on East 105th one more time. Tomorrow she would do what she had always done. She would show up. On the day of the hearing she arrived early at the courthouse on Lakeside Avenue. She wore a white button-down shirt she had ironed that morning on the kitchen table because she did not own an ironing board, black pants, and black shoes that were old but polished with a rag and a little cooking oil because she had no shoe polish. They looked fine, not new, but cared for. The way everything in her life looked, not new, but cared for. She sat in the 2nd row, hands on her knees, purse on the floor beside her feet. She did not fidget. She did not look around. She sat the way she always sat, in places where decisions were made about her life, still, upright, present. The landlord was on the other side with his lawyer. The lawyer had a briefcase and the legal pad and the particular calm of someone who knew the numbers were on his side. Mabel had no lawyer. The legal aid clinic had a 6-week wait. She did not have 6 weeks. She had today. The clerk called the room to order and asked if she was represented by counsel. She said no. The clerk told her she had the right to request a continuance. She said she was here now and they should proceed. All rise. The door behind the bench opened. The judge walked in, black robe. Young. Only 20 years old. The youngest judge most people in that room had ever seen. He moved with the careful precision of someone who knew people were watching and had decided the best response was to be exactly as competent as the situation required. No more. No less. He sat. The nameplate read Honorable Elijah Carter. He had kept the name from the foster family because by the time the adoption was finalized it was already on his school records, his social security card, his entire paper trail. Changing it would have meant changing everything. She had never asked him to change it. She had said a name is just a name. What matters is who answers to it. She looked up at the bench and saw a young man in a black robe. She did not see her son. She saw a judge. 20 years is a long time. The baby she had pulled from a dumpster, the boy she had walked to school, the teenager who had asked why she kept him, that was a different person. That person was connected to this one by paperwork and memory, but not by sight. She had not seen his face since he was 18. 2 years and 300 miles, and the kind of distance that is not only geography. He looked down at the docket, read the case number, read the name the way he read every name quickly, professionally. It was the 4th case of 11 that day. He asked counsel for the plaintiff to proceed. The landlord's lawyer stood and presented the clean facts. Lease from years earlier, rent current through August, arrears beginning after that, total outstanding including fees, notice served, no payments since. The numbers were clean. The timeline was clear. The law was on the landlord's side. The judge asked if she would like to respond. She stood. She had no legal pad. She had no notes. She had her hands at her sides, and the truth, which in a courtroom is sometimes enough and sometimes is not. She said she had lost her job at the hospital after 15 years. She had been looking for work since December and had not found anything yet. She paused. She was not asking the court to forgive the debt. She owed it. She knew she owed it. She was asking for more time. That was all. He looked at her. A professional look. The look a judge gives when assessing the weight of what has been said against the weight of the law. Standard. Procedural. Appropriate. But her voice, the way she said, that's all. Not pleading. Not performing. Not angry. Just flat, calm. The voice of someone who had been in rooms like this before and had learned that the volume of your voice has no relationship to whether anyone listens. Something moved in him. Not recognition. Not yet. Something older than that. Something that lived below the part of the brain that matches faces and names. A frequency, a rhythm in the way she spoke that his body knew even though his mind did not. It was like hearing a song you know, but cannot name. The melody is there. The words are almost there, but the title is gone. He looked at her 3 seconds longer than procedure required. She looked back. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She stood with her hands at her sides in her iron shirt and her old shoes and waited. He said the court would recess for 15 minutes. He stood and walked through the door behind the bench. In the small room he sat at the desk and looked at the file. He did not know why he had called a recess. He had 11 cases that day. He did not usually call recesses for eviction hearings. The facts were clear. The law was clear. There was no legal reason to pause, but he could not shake it. The voice, the stillness, the way she had said that's all, like she had been practicing the art of asking for the minimum her entire life. He opened the file again. Under dependence there was one word. None. He stopped. He read it again. No dependence. He knew his mother's name was Mabel. He knew she lived in Cleveland. He knew her last name was Turner. But Turner is a common name. Cleveland is a big city. And he had not spoken to her in almost 2 months, the longest gap since he left for school. The guilt of that gap was a small stone he carried in his chest that he had gotten very good at not looking at. He also knew he was the kind of person who verified before he believed. Law school had done that to him. Or perhaps he had always been that way. Perhaps growing up in a system that decided your life based on paperwork had made him someone who trusted paperwork more than instinct. He picked up the phone and asked the clerk's office to pull the adoption file for Elijah James Carter, Cuyahoga County, from years earlier. The clerk said it would take about 20 minutes. He said he would wait. He sat and looked out the window at the ordinary machinery, the Tuesday morning cars in the parking lot, a woman walking to her car with a stroller, a delivery truck backing up. He thought about the woman in the courtroom sitting with no lawyer and no notes, the calm of someone who had long ago accepted that the systems she moved through were not designed with her in mind. The way she had stood and spoken, no drama, no tears, just the facts, and then that's all. As if asking for more than the minimum would be a violation of some private code she had written for herself a long time ago. When the file arrived, he opened the thin manila folder. Adoptive parent, Mabel and Turner. Date of adoption, years earlier. Pre-adoption status, temporary foster custody granted months after the intake. CPS intake notes. Original file. Infant found abandoned in commercial dumpster behind a store on Lexington Avenue, Cleveland. Retrieved by civilian. Civilian identified as Mabel Turner. No fixed address. Infant transported to Metro Health Medical Center. Condition: mild hypothermia. No other injuries. Civilian accompanied infant to hospital. Civilian not related to infant. Civilian stated she found the infant while seeking shelter and heard crying from the dumpster. He read that line twice. He closed the file. He set it on the desk. He sat very still. He did not stand up. He did not cry. He did not call anyone. He sat in the chair in the small room behind the courtroom and felt the weight of what he had just read settle onto him, not gradually, all at once, the way something heavy lands when it has been falling for 20 years and finally hits. The woman in the courtroom, the woman with no lawyer, the woman who owed money and had said, "That's all I'm asking for," in the calmest voice he had ever heard. That woman had found him in a dumpster on Christmas Eve. She had taken off her only blanket and wrapped him in it. She had carried him 3 blocks in brutal cold with nothing covering her own body. She had sat in a hospital hallway all night. She had fought the system for months. She had worked 2 jobs. She had walked him to school. She had taped a certificate to the wall 3 times. And now she was sitting in his courtroom waiting for him to decide whether she got to keep her home. He had been in the room longer than the 15-minute recess. He stood, put the file in the desk drawer, straightened his robe, and opened the door. "All rise." The courtroom stood. Mabel stood. Her hands were at her sides. She watched the door behind the bench open for the second time that morning. He walked in. Same robe. Same bench. Same nameplate. But he was not the same person who had left this room minutes earlier. He sat. He looked at the courtroom. He looked at the landlord's attorney. He looked at the clerk. Then he looked at Mabel. Not at her file. Not at the case number. At her. At her hands resting on the table in front of her. Still, quiet. The same hands that had opened a dumpster lid 20 years ago. The same hands that had unwrapped a plastic bag in brutal cold and pulled out a baby that was almost not alive anymore. The same hands that had taken off a blanket and wrapped it around someone else's child when she had nothing else in the world. Those hands were sitting in his courtroom now, folded, waiting for him to decide something. He knew what he had to do. The law was clear. A judge shall disqualify himself in any proceeding in which the judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned. There was no gray area. There was no interpretation. The woman in front of him was his mother. He could not sit on this case. He said the court was recusing itself due to a conflict of interest. The case would be reassigned to another judge. A continuance of 30 days was granted pending reassignment. The landlord's attorney stood and said his client had already waited months. 30 days on top of that. He said 30 days, counsel. He did not explain. He did not elaborate. He did not offer a reason beyond the one he had already given. His voice was level, not cold, not warm, the voice of someone who had made a decision and was not interested in discussing it. The attorney sat down. He said this court was adjourned. He stood. He did not leave. He watched the room begin to empty. The landlord stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out. His attorney followed with briefcase in hand. The clerk gathered her papers. 2 people from the gallery stood and shuffled toward the hall. Mabel picked up her purse from the floor, put it over her shoulder, stood, and turned toward the aisle. He said, "Ms. Turner." She stopped. She turned around. She looked at him the way you look at a judge who has just said your name carefully, with the particular alertness of someone who has learned that when authority speaks to you directly, it usually means something is about to get worse. He asked if she could stay for a moment. She looked at him. She did not say anything. She sat back down. The clerk looked at him. He nodded. She left. The door closed behind her. The courtroom was empty. Just the 2 of them. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The sound of the building's ventilation system. The quiet of a room that had been full of people seconds ago and was now holding only 2. He stepped down from the bench, reached for the zipper at the back of his robe, pulled it down, took the robe off, folded it carefully the way you fold something when you need your hands to do something because the rest of you does not know what to do yet, and set it on the chair behind the bench. He walked around the bench, down the 2 steps, past the clerk's desk, past the bar. He stopped in front of the table where she was sitting. He was wearing a white shirt and dark slacks underneath the robe. No robe, no bench, no nameplate. Just a 20-year-old man standing in front of a 58-year-old woman in an empty courtroom on a Tuesday morning. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Level. Eye to eye. Nobody above anybody else. She looked at him. She still did not know. 20 years. The baby she had held was a newborn. The boy she had raised had left at 18 2 years ago. But 2 years is a long time when someone changes from 18 to 20 when they go from a kitchen on Euclid Avenue to a law degree in Columbus. When the last time you saw them they were wearing a graduation gown, and now they are wearing a judge's robe. She did not recognize him because the distance between who he was and who he had become was exactly the distance she had spent 20 years building. He asked if she knew who he was. She said he was the judge. He said before that. Silence. The fluorescent lights hummed. A door closed somewhere down the hall. The sound of footsteps fading. He reached into the pocket of his shirt and took out a photograph, small, printed on regular paper, edges soft from years of being handled, one corner folded, colors faded. It was a photo of a woman holding a child. The woman stood in front of a door, a studio apartment on Euclid Avenue. The child was about 2. The woman was not smiling in the way people smile for cameras. She was smiling in the way people smile, and they do not know anyone is watching. He set the photo on the table between them. She looked down at it. She did not pick it up. She simply looked for a long time, the way you look at something when your eyes understand it before your mind does. Her hand came up slowly. She touched the edge of the photo with her fingertip. Her hand was shaking not from weakness, not from age, but from the effort of holding something very large and very still inside herself. She said his name. She said it like a question, but it was not a question. It was a word she had not said to anyone in almost 2 years. And saying it now, in this room, to this face, cracked something open that she had been keeping closed for a very long time. She did not cry. She put her hand over her mouth. She stood very still, the kind of still that comes when you are afraid that if you move, the thing in front of you will turn out to be something you made up. That if you breathe too hard the room will rearrange itself back into a courtroom, and this will just be a judge again, and you will just be a case number. She stood there. He sat there. Neither of them moved. The fluorescent light buzzed. That was the only sound. To people in an empty courtroom, 20 years between them, and a photograph on a table, he asked why she had kept him. The same question, the same 4 words. The kitchen table on Euclid Avenue. He was 16. She was washing dishes. The water was running. She had said because someone had to. He had said that was not an answer. She had said it was the only one she had. He was asking again. Not from a kitchen. From a courtroom. Not at 16, at 20. Not as a beau who did not understand. As a man who was beginning to. She looked at him. She took her hand away from her mouth. She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that happens when someone is choosing between the easy answer and the real one, and deciding after 20 years that the real one is the only one that matters anymore. She said because he was real, and she had needed something real. He did not say anything. She did not explain. There was nothing to explain. The sentence sat between them like the photograph on the table, small, worn, true. She looked at him. She looked at the shirt he was wearing, the way it fit, the way he sat with his back straight and his hands on the table. The weight of him, the physical fact of a full-grown person who had once fit inside her arms on a plastic chair in a hospital hallway at 3 in the morning. She said he looked like he ate enough now. He laughed, a short, unexpected laugh, the kind that arrives before you can decide whether laughing is appropriate. It was exactly appropriate. It was the most appropriate sound either of them had heard all morning. The laugh faded. The room was quiet again. But a different quiet now. Not the quiet of to strangers. The quiet of to people who have found each other in a place where neither of them expected to be found. He asked if she still had it. She did not ask what. She knew. The blanket. She said it was in a box under her bed. Been there 20 years. He said she had kept it. Not a question. She said it was the only thing left from that night. Everything else was gone. The church, the hospital. Father Dominic had passed years earlier. She paused. The apartment. She stopped. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The apartment was the reason she was in this courtroom. The apartment she had lived in for 19 years. The apartment where the blanket was. If she lost the apartment, she lost the blanket. Not because it would be thrown away. Because it would be in a box on the street instead of a box under a bed. And there is a difference between keeping something safe and just carrying it. He heard what she did not say, the way you hear the note someone does not play in a song they are singing. He said she was not losing that apartment. She looked at him and said he could not do that. He was a judge. It was a conflict of The room was very quiet. The photograph was still on the table between them. The blanket was in a box 19 blocks away. The eviction notice was on a kitchen table next to a certificate that said Most Improved Reader, taped to the wall with 2 layers of tape. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that the silence was not already saying. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is more than enough. Sometimes that is everything.